Brazil, South Africa dimension, with India serving as the swing state within what can be considered an IPEA BRICS dynamic. The aim here being to contextualize BRICS as a coalition in its diverse geopolitical and strategic landscapes. In trying to set the tone for the context for these contributions, the focus, which I think is very important in gaining an understanding of BRICS, is the need to look at the BRICS countries within their regional context. The global reality, as I see it, and which was very well articulated by one of the Financial Times commentators, Stephen Phillips, is which really struck me, was his focus on the fact that the global reality is a reality of global economic integration. That is the reality. And it is essentially, it is a post-Westphalian reality, because global economic integration basically has taken away a lot of the capacity of countries to totally control their destiny. So, for me, it is important to look at the integrationist dynamics surrounding each of the BRICS countries and BRICS itself. Because what within this context, what we're looking at is a pattern essentially of what I would call the regionalization of multipolarity, in which you have major powers with sometimes competitive, sometimes complementary regional economic integration agendas. I mean, if you look, if you just look at Eurasia, where you have the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and then and that is essentially a China-dominated but China-Russia co-led entity, in which every time there is a BRICS, there is an SCO summit, there begin to be speculations that India, Iran, Pakistan will become full members. But it's a very important organization in terms of integration in Eurasia. And then you have the Russian incipient Eurasian Economic Union, which represents a specific integrationist agenda there. South Africa is very much caught up in an integrationist dynamic in Southern Africa, and particularly with the Cape to Cairo, Eastern and Southern African Grand Free Trade Area. Brazil, you have UNASUR. And one of the interesting things coming out of Fortaleza was what seemed to be the beginning of an awareness of the regional dimension. So, you know, my intent in conceptualizing this collection of essays was to try to focus on the integrationist underlying dynamics of the BRICS countries. And I think with that, I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Francis. I already have some questions, but I guess I'll hold those till the Q&A. Paulo, take us through Fortaleza, please.
Thank you very much, Monday. Thank you, Francis, for the invitation to participate in this book. Thank you all for being here. It's very interesting that such a subject generates such interest, such great interest. This is a very large public for this room. Thank you for being here. I am going to, in my modest contribution to this, and the Brazil part of this displays papers from people that have different views on BRICS. Some people are very upbeat and positive, others are more on this are skeptics about this. As I described here, Brazil, BRICS in Brazil was initially seen as some sort of a Wall Street plot, where it was created actually to facilitate the sale of high-risk assets to everybody. And since then, they have I forgot the names, but there are some that involves Mexico and Indonesia and Turkey, and depending on the wind of the market that week, there is another one. It has to do, it's a marketing strategy to sell assets of higher risk. Now, the crisis of 2008 obviously gave the BRICS an opportunity to emerge as something. And it really emerged initially, we believe it's, and I'm using an expression here, I borrow from a former U.S. ambassador to Brazil, Tom Shannon, currently the counselor to the State Department. It's a diplomatic elevator. For Brazil, it was that, it is that. As a former Brazilian ambassador, Marcos Azambuja, said, it's not important to be in the BRICS. The terrible thing is not to be in the BRICS, because it provides you a space that you didn't have before, and that, well, what you do with that space was the subject of debate, of speculation for about 5 years. And the summit held in Fortaleza just after the end of the World Cup was supposed to, I think it was timed that way. I looked for the explanation because I sort of thought it was not a very good idea to mix soccer with that. Never do that in Brazil. We know exactly what soccer is, and we know exactly what politics is, and we don't mix those. And everybody who tries, has a very negative experience. It was the event that elevated, I believe, the BRICS from a branding exercise into something a little bit more substantive, building on the only thing that the BRICS did that was important. After the collapse of Wall Street in 2008, and when it came time to recognize that the world had changed, that you need to change the formats of tables and get new actors into trying to fix the global economy, well, you may remember the image of President Bush hosting a G20 meeting here in Washington and inviting the president of China and the president of Brazil to sit at his sides, conveying the message, well, we are in new territory here, let's bring new actors. I followed that process very closely, the initial process of reform of the international financial institutions, and the BRICS did work in coordination. And I hear this from Brazilian diplomats that are part of that process that were themselves surprised by the intensity of the coordination, and they did produce some initial results in terms of governance of those institutions. If you talk to Brazilian diplomats involved in the BRICS process, they say the outcome of the Fortaleza meeting is contains a message of dissatisfaction about the speed and the content of the reform of the IFIs. There was initial movement. That movement died. The G20 was in evidence. It sort of disappeared. And the BRICS were there, hanging in there somewhere. They kept making the sum. They kept meeting, announced what was finally announced and made official at the Fortaleza Summit, which is the creation of the new development bank, a development bank founded by the BRICS members, and a contingency line of stabilization. Those are important in itself. It's easy, however, to overplay the importance of those. The stabilization, starting with the stabilization fund of $100 billion, some people wrote this is a device that will act in competition with the established institutions. I tend to think, from what I read and talking to people involved, that that is incorrect. The idea is that that's a complement. One of the conditions to access the contingency line unless they change this officially, is to have an agreement with the IMF. So here you see, it's not something to change the world, it's something to improve the world. And act in areas, so you have $100 billion more, which are part of the currency reserves of the five countries, as added assistance. The bank. The bank is an important, good idea. Each of those countries, especially China, India, and Brazil, have very large development banks. I believe that the Brazilian Development Bank has a portfolio of loans that exceeds that of the World Bank and the IDB combined. But it is important to, continue to develop more institutions or more ideas and put more money in this. We obviously know that countries, especially, I would say, India, South Africa, and Brazil, are countries very much focused on infrastructure. So it is a natural thing for them to do. Now, if you think in terms of dimensions, and here I am borrowing a bit from our global fellow from Brazil, Carlos Lins da Silva, who wrote a very interesting article about this. He is the editor of Foreign Policy, Política Externa. It's a journal in Brazil. It is not, at least initially, the new development bank to be established, headquarters in Shanghai, led in its first 5 years by a citizen of India, with vice presidents from the other countries. Obviously, it will be there. It will have lines of credit. This is so far a matter of speculation because we don't know what are the conditionalities. Some people believe that the conditionalities will be maybe more realistic. But there will be conditionalities. We don't believe that the five countries are about to start throwing money away. Now, the portfolio, the initial capacity of lending of the new development bank will be an average $3.6 billion a year for the first 10 years of the bank. This is what people that put this together estimate. This represents 5% of the current loan portfolio of the World Bank. Therefore, this can obviously be positive. This can obviously be important. It can eventually even finance projects that the World Bank may not want to finance. The World Bank does not hold the absolute truth about how to do things, and maybe those countries that have more of a sensibility to the developing world may be creative and find new ways of fostering development. But you have to be realistic. I see the BRICS and the New Development Bank as important as long as it stay within its proclaimed objective, which is economic, which is quite narrow. Some people, and you read the same articles I wrote, started extrapolating and finding some major meanings of this new group that will change the world. Let me give you 3 examples why I would say, and Brazilians are very skeptical about that. I will explain to you why very briefly. I think Francis mentioned the idea of integration. The challenge of Brazil today, economically, is the lack of integration of the Brazilian economy in the global economy. Brazil was a country that about 20 years ago was primarily an exporter of manufactured products. Brazil today is primarily an exporter of primary products. The Brazil relation with China especially was described by a senior former member of Brazilian diplomatic corps, former Director General of UNCTAD, Rubens Recupero, as a new form of colonialism. Why? Because Brazil sells to China primary products. I think 85% of what you sell to our first trading partner is soybean, iron ore, and oil. And Brazil, like everybody else, buy finished products from value-added products from China. And this is not China's fault. In Brazil, the debate is about the content of our trade and also about the quantity. Brazil, that was once over almost 2% of global trade, today is maybe 1.5% of global trade. Brazil, the 7th largest economy in the world, I repeat, represents 1.5% of global trade. There is a disconnect here. This is a subject of major concern today, debate in Brazil. The Brazilian economy is going through a very difficult period. It has basically stagnated, and most experts, this is in the media in Brazil every day, believe that Brazil will have to reconsider its approach to integration and basically start to open up the economy in order to achieve better outcomes. This is the context. The final thing I would like to observe before passing the floor to Renato is that if you go outside of the very narrow definition of the BRICS, which is the economic one, focusing on the New Development Bank, focusing on more cooperation, efforts to continue to reform the existing global financial institutions, you get, at least as far as Brazil is concerned, you get into real difficult situations. It has to do with divergent interests. Some people, especially some scholars, go out on a limb and say the BRICS is great because this has helped to reform the world and obviously take the Security Council of the United Nations. That looks pretty obsolete right now, because it doesn't represent the world. It represents, there are 5 countries with veto rights, and they don't represent the balance of power in the world today. That is true. Brazil, obviously, starting under President Cardoso, but more forcefully under President Lula, sought to reform that body. That effort was blocked by a BRIC country, China. Brazil has had its absolute objective in trade policy the trade, the Doha round of trade negotiations at the WTO, who has recently died. Why? One of the final obstacles was a difficulty that we all understand the reason. Because countries like the United States and like Brazil, that have modern agricultures, that are major exporters, obviously are looking for a open trade in agriculture. India has 400 million family farmers, subsistence farmers. India cannot open up its agriculture because it would be completely devastated with political and social consequences for India and for the rest of the world. Here is an absolute, I'm just being descriptive here. So what happened in the Doha round, it basically ended 2 weeks ago, after India and the United States could not come to an agreement about this. Finally, regarding Russia, the events surrounding Russia right now, having to do with Ukraine, having to do with the downing of that Malayan airplane, have created a very interesting dynamic. As you know, the European Union and the United States have joined to impose additional sanctions on Russia as a function of that. That in Europe, that is a very emotional subject because of not only the monstrosity of the event, but the number of Dutch citizens that were assassinated in that event. The other day in the Brazilian media, there were reports about since the United States and the European Union will sanction Russia by not supplying them with some foodstuffs that they used to import from Russia. And Russia responded saying, by the way, we are not going to import from you anymore, banning imports from those countries. What happened is that the media in Brazil said, well, Brazil will take enormous advantages of this because we are going to supply whatever Europe that sells $16 billion worth of foodstuffs to Russia every year, and the United States, which sells about $1.5 billion, will not provide. There are obviously geopolitical implications for that arrangement. And this is not something that you can just say, well, we'll take advantage of the situation. It's much more complicated than that. Those are the three examples that I wanted to give you about the difficulties of BRICS. If you see BRICS outside of what the narrow definition of this this grouping and the purpose it was created, which is to reform the international financial institutions. And if you go outside of that, you have all kinds of complications. Well, I will stop here because I think that Renato has some very interesting information to share, which comes from work done by IPEA, the leading think tank in Brazil, in preparation for the summit in Fortaleza. And I think we're very glad that Renato could take time and share with us the findings of both on investment and finance, the relationship between each BRIC country and its immediate surrounding, its neighborhoods. Thank you.
Thank you, Paulo. Are you ready for us?
Renato. Oops.
Ooh.
Okay, I'm listening.
You're listening. All right. The mic is all yours, so please. You have
Okay,
15
thank
to
you very
20
much.
minutes.
Thank you very much for the invitation. It's a bit different from what Paulo said. Let me start by making some generic considerations with regard to the BRICS, and then I'll close down to the two books that we have launched recently. Let me start by saying that if I can call it the literature on BRICS, emphasizes two dimensions, the half full and the half empty glass. The half full glass is what the figures show us. At least the 4 countries, with due respect to South Africa, but at least the original 4 countries are big, big population, big size, high per capita income, and so on and so forth. Well, not per capita, high GDP, for that matter. And that signalizes a potential complementarity that has started well before Jim O'Neill created the acronym. I would say that at least a couple of years before the BRICS acronym was created, the foreign affairs in the 4 countries were already starting to look at each other as potential candidates for a closer relationship. Now, having said that, that goes on the half full size of the glass. The half empty size of the glass is the skepticism with regard to history, institutional environment, culture, and potential conflicts with neighboring countries, as Paulo has just mentioned recently. So, as a matter of fact, in some of the seminars, I heard an Indian journalist saying, "Welcome to Eurasian wars for South Africa and Brazil." You have so many conflicts down there, and it's a bit complicated to put the 5 together. Now, having said that, the whole exercise starts, as you well know, in 2009 in Yekaterinburg. And I invite you to make an exercise, a quantitative exercise. Being an economist, you always tend to think in terms of numbers. Take the declaration of each summit since Yekaterinburg. What you are going to see is, in 2009, the declaration had some 20 articles and essentially focusing on a joint action towards changing or influencing global governance. And the subsequent summits, each one increases the number of articles and adds up a plan of action, so that from the 20 initial articles in Fortaleza, we came out with 72. Now, there is, of course, the risk of losing perspective of what are we doing here, what's exactly our joint objective. But the formal argument is that to the extent that we amplify the points of intersection, we get to know each other better, and we get to know, improve our joint knowledge of what can be done jointly. And now you have a rather diversified agenda, which contributes to this diffuse vision that we have with regard to the BRICS as an exercise. What exactly is that? And this is the first point I'd like to remark. I mean, it's something that started with a very clear objective of we are big, we have been growing more than industrialized countries, we can affect global governance, and we should. But over time, we have been building up a more diversified agenda. Now, 3 outcomes are have normally been indicated as successful action by the BRICS. A, the change of IMF quotas, B, the creation of the Development Bank, and C, the creation of the contingent reserve agreements. Until Fortaleza, none of the 3 had materialized. And of course, the IMF quotas is something still to be done. Strong commitments by the BRICS, at the G20, strong statements, and so on, but still the US is there, and it has not materialized. Now, the generic reading of the Fortaleza Declaration emphasized the bank and the CRA, the Contingent Reserve Agreement. The bank, of course, as Paulo has very well stated, it's a complementary thing, even because it's small. There is this a number of studies who show that there is an excess demand for resources for infrastructure investment in the world as a whole, mostly in the developing world. The World Bank has not enough money, the IDB has not enough money, so something is welcome to add up in this amount of resource. Now, having said that, 50 billion worth of subscribed capital is peanuts. But the point is, this gives a signal that something, it's probably after Bretton Woods, this bank is probably the first institution that has been created not at a regional level, involving countries from different regions. I may be wrong, my memory probably is failing me, but I don't recall of any other institution after Bretton Woods with that characteristic. Now, the creation of the bank, of course, gives a strong signal that, look, guys, we can do something here. And the bank starts with 50 billion and 100 billion authorized capital as a sort of strategy so as to build up credibility and gradually starting to be accepted by the financial market. Why so? Because one of the readings is that there is this risk of the use of those resources on a political basis, and that would be deadly for a financial institution. So if the bank starts from a low level, doing its homework as in the way that is acceptable by the financial markets, and so on and so forth, it will gradually come out to AA and AAA classification. That's the feeling, and that's the guess, and that's the dream. But there is another aspect which is important to keep in mind, is that the creation of the bank is a first step, in the sense that it's already created, something formally, an institution has already been created. And if today it's only 50 billion, if some crisis comes out or for some reason, you already have the means to put more money into that, because it will be already there. So there is a reading of another signaling to the financial market that, look, guys, we have created the mechanism, now we can play with it. And this is a dimension which I think is relevant to keep in mind. Now, there is a very strong risk in the whole exercise of BRICS, which is becoming China +4. The whole debate about the CRA, the whole debate about the bank capital showed that quite clearly. China has always wanted to put huge amount of money in hand and wanted to have a stronger voice. And the diplomatic challenge here is to keep the pace at an equitable basis in any subsequent initiatives, as well as in the very operation of the bank and the CRA. This will require diplomatic skill from the other four. I think everybody has that quite clear. The way China behaves is very peculiar in the sense that it has never accepted to play the game as G2 with the US, as Russia did for quite a long time. It always presents itself as one successful emerging economy and one voice from the underdeveloped world. But of course, it's a second economy, and of course, it's a huge amount of money they are sitting on, 4 trillion US worth of reserves. So this imposes a diplomatic challenge on the other four. Paulo has also mentioned another diplomatic challenge we have been talking yesterday by phone, which is the very fact that the declarations and the statements at the BRICS level, it's not anti-West, but is clearly and repeatedly cautious with regards to Western prescription. And by saying that, that position involves and requires, almost by definition, a homogeneous position with regard to the position of the 5 countries altogether. Now, We, of course, have the Crimea, Ukraine situation. We, of course, have the potential situation with the Senkaku Islands and everything else that comes in the South China Sea, which means that at least two of the participants, India has always conflicts with every single neighbor, but at least in the case of two of the 5 countries, we have actual or potential conflicts. Now, if homogeneity is a precondition for the joint action by the 5, then that requires more clear statement of support, mutual support among the 5. So far, that has not materialized. So far, what we have had is abstention votes at the UN, the General Assembly. But how far can we go with that? It's not quite clear. The Fortaleza Declaration mentions the Ukraine in a very indirect way, in a very diplomatic wording, in a very small paragraph. So there is a second and very important diplomatic challenge here, which may, at some point in time, this scenario may even impose a challenge or make it difficult for the very operation of the common institutions. Now, the other risk involved in this exercise has been mentioned, not with those words, but has been referred to by these South African speakers that talked before Paulo, when he mentioned the IPEA initiative. So far, to my view, the BRICS exercise has, to some extent, superimposed the IPEA initiative, which I think it's a pity, because the IPEA had a more focused agenda. It's a much older exercise, and the set of 3 countries are far more homogeneous than the 5 BRICS countries. So, but there is this risk of killing the IPEA initiative as well as eventually other initiatives. Now, having said that, may I call your attention to a few aspects of the Fortaleza Declaration that are normally not as stressed or emphasized as the bank and the CRA. Very often, at least in the Brazilian press, what comes out clearly is the bank and the CRA decision, the creation of the CRA. But I think there are other aspects that are worth emphasizing. One is another aspect that has also been mentioned by the South African speaker, which is the regional dimension. This is not a small thing. It started in Durban last year, but in the Durban summit, it had a specific reason for that. I mean, a specific reason for the chief of state to meet the Africans, the other non-South African chief of states. The very fact that the membership by South Africa has a regional dimension, as different from the other 4. Now, so the Durban summit had a very peculiar dimension. Now, come Fortaleza, President Dilma has invited for this meeting between the 5 BRICS chiefs of state with the South American chief of state, UNASUR. That gives us a second exercise with regional dimension, which brand new in the BRICS, which is unprecedented, which was not thought of originally, but is probably a reflection of something that is very strong, which is the intensity of the economic and geopolitical relationship of China with its neighboring countries. I'll come to that later on. A second aspect of the Fortaleza Declaration I'd like to call your attention to is an article that calls for cooperation among BRICS for the export credit and guarantees agencies, which might bring some positive impact on trade among these 5 countries. Another is cooperation of BRICS insurance and reinsurance markets. As you see, the agenda is diversified very clearly and in very sensitive and relevant dimensions. Another one is taxation, the concern with tax evasion, transnational fraud and aggressive tax planning. Another one is signaling of the need for change in the shareholding of the World Bank. Now we are not talking about IMF quotas anymore. Now we are adding up the World Bank. The acknowledgement of the importance of state-owned companies, code of conduct of outer space activities, etc. Now, starting with, if I'm not wrong, with the Delhi Declaration, I don't recall about the Sunny Declaration, but Delhi, Durban, and Fortaleza, you have another dimension which is something, to my view, a bit odd. A number of statements with regard to the situation of in some conflicted areas in the world. In the Fortaleza Declaration, I was taking a look right now, there is reference to not less than 15 countries: Guinea-Bissau, Mali, South Sudan, Syria, the Arabi-Israeli conflict, and so on and so forth, which is also another new dimension. The BRICS manifesting themselves as a big player in the horizon and saying things that you would have expected to be heard at the UN General Assembly. So this is something that might also contribute to what I said at the beginning, losing the perspective of what exactly are our main objectives here. Now, this set of considerations I bring to you just to mention and to end up my intervention. We in IPEA have launched 2 books on BRICS and their neighbors, precisely because I can't read, but I suppose I'm running short of time.
5 minutes.
I can't read what is written there, but I understand the message. We have launched 2 books on BRICS and their neighbors, one with regard to trade flows and trade agreements, and another one with regard to investment flows. Why so? Because the data show us that a good deal of the Chinese competitiveness has to do with the productive complementarity it achieves with its very peculiar and unparalleled relationship with the neighboring countries. Among the BRICS, you have trade barriers, trade disequilibrium, deficit and bilateral relationship, and investment, which is predominantly resource-seeking. So if there is this objective of building up more solid relationship, the agenda, the homework to be done is very significant and goes toward more structural definitions like opening up to trade and redefining investment on a more solid base on productive complementarity. We are still far away from that. And here I end up. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I thought 3 very, very good presentations, so I thank our speakers very much for that. We'll open up the floor. Thank you. We'll open up the floor for questions. If you would keep your questions short and to the point, just identify yourself and your organization, identify which of the speakers you're directing the question to, and then we'll go from there. We'll take 3 at a time. So I'll get up here. So let me swing around this way, and then I'll come on this way. Sir. Just wait for the mic. We should be good to go.
Yeah, Bill Jones, Executive Intelligence Review. I'd just like to go back to what Professor Kornegay began with, talking about how some people are talking about BRICS is not the way that the BRICS countries themselves see the BRICS. It seems to me that one has to look also at the underlying economic dynamic in which the BRICS has been created. And I think Professor Oliveira mentioned that it's the first time that there has been a kind of a multinational organization set up since the Bretton Woods Conference. And you see it was a number of key nations acting in their own national interest to create an institution internationally which would be working in their benefit. That's what Bretton Woods was all about. It has changed with time. The IMF and the World Bank have become a power unto themselves, and the countries that have suffered as a result of that have taken measures to try and change that. I'll mention just one comment that President Rousseff on CCTV, I saw that after the BRICS summit, said that no longer will the IMF come here and be able to dictate what we must do, that there is now an alternative. It's a question where this is going to go, but I think the underlying dynamic is that the Western world, which has been facing with the worst financial crisis, the system has failed, as President Mbeki said when he was here in Washington, and that what is happening in BRICS, even though it's a small amount compared to what is needed, it is directed towards infrastructure, towards building the physical economy, not saving the bankrupt bankers, and that therefore it's a new dynamic in the international world system which is pointing upwards and not downwards. And I think that is the underlying dynamic of BRICS, regardless of how any individual wants to see it, because of the nature of the system we're living in. And I think it represents a tremendous amount of hope as a result of that, and I think that hope is important because it's in a world in which there's a lot of desperation at the present moment. And if you want to comment on that, I'd appreciate that too.
Thank you. There's a lady in the back over there.
Hi, I'm Nancy Alexander from the Heinrich Böll Foundation. Great presentations, and my questions are for the Brazilian ambassador very quickly. Number one, is the $3.5 billion a year by the New Development Bank, is that a firm ceiling? And if so, why is it so low? Number two, the other reserve fund, the Chiang Mai Initiative, has never, ever been activated. Are you any more optimistic that the CRA would be activated, especially given the contingency of an IMF agreement? And number three, lastly, your concern with deindustrialization of Brazil is a concern that's just really widespread, as you know. And I'm just curious, from the Brazilian point of view, you said the task for you is to liberalize, to open up, when a lot of the industrialization has occurred through trade barriers and helping infant industries and using the state to penetrate markets. So I'm just curious if you could just say a couple of words, because I think that your point goes back to what Professor Kornegay said about the terms of integration, and whether, much of the world just wants to be primary suppliers, to a few manufacturers or not. Thank you.
All right, I'll take one more, and please make it one. I know very rich questions, but we want to get around to everybody. So one question, sir.
Lawrence Freeman, I'm the director of the Africa desk at EIR. We just had the summit here in Washington, and the position of the administration has been what we've known for a long time: we don't do infrastructure. And if you look at the Fortaleza Declaration, the New Development Bank is dedicated to infrastructure, to the developing sector. President Zuma, speaking at the summit, said very clearly that these policies of the IMF and the World Bank have not worked for the developing countries, and we need something new. So I think we're looking at the seed crystal. It's not anti-IMF, I agree with you, that's not the purpose, but it is the seed crystal of a new conception of actually lending cheap credit to finance infrastructure projects like nuclear energy, like water projects and others, which is exactly how we built our own country. I would also point out that the 5 BRIC countries are all pro-nuclear power, and they're all building nuclear power plants, which is totally different than the West, and the Chinese have gone even further to now launching a program to mine helium-3 on the moon for fusion power. So the whole conception of these countries, I think, should be taken as a whole and looking toward a more positive development approach to the future of this planet and including the developing sector in it. Thank you.
Let me turn it over to our panelists. I think a lot of what I hear in those questions has to do with the potential for the mission of the BRICS actually evolving to take on a much larger mission that has to do with changing the international political and economic order that exists. A lot about the financing of the new development bank, whether that's sufficient. There was one about the CRA actually coming to fruition, given the track record that we've had so far on bringing other efforts to fruition, and then the challenges of industrialization, and then lastly, the role of infrastructure and how best to approach that. So I'll open it to Paulo. You want to start us off first?
I would like to hear Renato
Okay.
first about the portfolio, etc., and where the 3.6 figure, obviously it's a very prudent figure. The bank has an initial capital of 50. It will obviously have to. It's not clear to me how the bank will procure the funds to loan, and very important point that he made, it has to be AAA. You have to, like the bank, the World Bank and the IDB in our case in the region. But I would like to hear from Renato first. Renato.
I think we lost him for a bit. Francis, why don't you go while we...
Yeah, you know, one thing that I want to interject into this is that one has to look at more than just the NDB, the BRICS Development Bank, because what is emerging is a new generation of DFIs. In addition to the new development bank, you've got coming on stream the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. In Africa, you've got the China-Africa Development Fund, which has partnered with the African Development Bank to create something called the African Growth Partnership, or something like that. There was an intention in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization to actually set up a bank as well several years ago. But that bank hasn't gotten off the ground because of a tug of war between Russia and China on the terms of setting up such a bank. I mean, the Russians would want an SCO bank to build on the already existing Eurasian Development Bank, whereas China wants to would like to set up a completely new bank, and which really raises some very interesting geopolitical, financial dynamics into the picture. When you look at the NDB, and India played a very critical role in making sure that the NDB would be structured in such a way that there would be equitable shareholding and control, rather than the bank being totally dominated by China. But Chinese strategy appears to be a preference for start from the scratch DFIs, which it would have predominant control of. So this opens up a new dynamic in terms of global development financing, and I'm not sure that the notion that the U.S. doesn't do infrastructure is something to be taken at face value, since the World Bank has launched or is going to be launching something called the the global infrastructure facility. So it may be that the U.S. may not directly do infrastructure, but it may indirectly do infrastructure. So I think one has to. I think there's a big picture, and this is why I would say BRICS has to be viewed as a point of departure, and not, just as it is.
Let me say something on infrastructure. The World Bank and the IDB in the 70s, 60s, 70s, 80s did a lot of infrastructure projects in Brazil. This was related to some of those projects were very controversial, having to do especially with roads and other infrastructure works. And those became politically inviable, not viable in the setting of mobilizations by non-governmental organizations in Washington, later in Brazil. And those two banks have, in the case of Brazil, redirected its efforts much more to policy-oriented types of loans to influence the policy making. They specialize in education, in health, and in the case of the IDB, in sub-regional loans. The IDB, I think, no longer lends in Brazil, if it's very small, but it lends to states and to cities, and most of those programs are directed to policies in areas that are absolutely priorities in Brazil. The question of infrastructure investment remains in Brazil, and when I talk about the need that it's recognized in Brazil today that we need to find a new way to attract foreign capital to Brazil, it has in part to do with that, is to make investing in infrastructure in Brazil more attractive to foreign investors. I can give you very negative examples of that, and I can give you very positive examples of that, depending on the set of incentives. And Brazil is a country that is capable of doing that. For instance, the International Airport of Rio is going to be renovated by a joint venture by Odebrecht, which is the largest construction company in Brazil, and the company whose name I forget, but manages the airport in Singapore that is the best airport in the world. And so Rio will be managed by the same company that managed Singapore. I assume it will be, by the time of the Olympics, a spectacular airport. That is the type of, at the same time, I can point out to you in other areas, for instance, in oil, the oil exploration, the pre-salt, where we adopted a different set of policies that has made foreign investment in that more difficult. And there has been problems there. In terms of deindustrialization, this is an issue that is not of scholars, of economists. This is an issue of the private sector in Brazil. There is clearly an deindustrialization process. It's not exclusive to Brazil, as you pointed out, but it's deeply felt where, for instance, China has displaced Brazilian exports in our own neighborhood. Because they're just simply more efficient. And this has had a very important discussion in Brazil on how to increase competitiveness. And in that context, that's where a higher degree of opening in the economy. We fully understand that the United States, Russia, Europe, everybody developed at a certain point in closed economies. We all know this. But we are in a different stage of global development. You have to deal with the reality that you have. And this is where the discussion goes. I think we are having now presidential elections in Brazil in October that have become very competitive, apparently. And this is an issue that will either during going through the presidential elections or after will be hotly debated in Brazil because the country has slowed down, and most economists, most observers in Brazil say that in order to get out of this hole, We have to do something dramatic about the direction, how we mobilize economic resources, the domestic one and the foreign ones. Remember, Brazil is a country that has some thousands of foreign companies. It's really not, although some of us think that it's a more closed economy than we would like it to be. It is it's not, name one major American company and go to São Paulo or to the south of Brazil, it's there. But there is a discussion, I believe it's a very healthy discussion imposed by reality. The reality of a slowing economy that has lost productivity and is in a process of transformation through the expansion of a middle class. This is something that is precisely the opposite of what's been happening in the United States, for instance. And that growing middle class is creating more demands for more, for better, for faster, and is the main driver of this effort to continue the transformation. And this is what policymakers in Brazil, members of Congress, and people in positions like Renato Baumann, who is a leading figure in a leading think tank in Brasilia, who is an employee of the state in Brazil, has to deal with. And thank God, I think we have the environment in Brazil open enough to allow this discussion to take place.
Are you back online with us? Sorry. Are you back online with us?
Yes, go ahead, Renato.
No, the sound is coming and going. I take pieces of what you've said, but I don't take the. I haven't listened to the questions or anything. And I'm having very strong problems with sound.
Okay, I think.
If
A bit
you're
lost.
patient, Renato, we are going to email you the questions. So,
Yeah.
Okay.
so you seem to be understanding what I am saying.
I understood your reference to the World Bank action here in Brazil and something with regard to opening up the economy, but
Yeah.
that was
Now,
as far as I could go.
Just ask him one question. And
No,
then I'll
the one question that I think you could clarify is on the structure of capital of the new development bank and the amount, the portfolio, the initial loan portfolio of the bank at, I believe, 3.6 billion. This is the number we all have. Why that low? I think the question was kind of that. Why not more than 3.6 billion per year in the first 10 years?
Well, this is the first time I see this figure of 3.6. My knowledge went as far as the 50 billion of authorized capital. And I understand the whole process of the type of project that is going to be financed, which country can be have access to the resources, whether it's only projects the BRICS countries or projects of companies from BRICS countries elsewhere. I understand that all that is still being discussed. As far as I know, at least, I'm not directly involved in the whole debate. That's for the Ministry of Finance. But as far as I could follow the debate, all these issues are still to be defined. But
Okay.
I don't know if I have answered your question.
Yes, no, you did.
I think
Probably
what.
I did not, but
Thank you. I think what we heard is that it's a work in progress. So it's just starting. It could increase, but right now it's a work in progress with a lot of details still to be defined. Let me take three very quick
yes, very
questions.
much so. That's the idea. One of the main obstacles to be surpassed was the very political decision of where the headquarters would be and who would chair at the first mandate.
Okay.
And I understand that have been diplomatically sound in giving up the candidacy for the presidency, giving it to India. South Africa achieved a regional office of the bank, and everybody went back home quite happy. The Russians preside the ministerial council, and Brazil presides the administration council. So the main definitions of the actions to be taken will inevitably involve Russia and Brazil and India.
Okay.
So I think everybody
Okay.
went back home quite happy. But beyond it, I have no idea. I have no information.
Okay, Renato, thank you.
Okay, I think the subtext there that it is that even within the BRICS, there is a jostling for position and leadership. So it's not just the larger international economic and political order that we're talking about. 3 very quick questions. Please make them short so we can have our speakers respond and close this event off.
If they can just speak up into the microphone, please.
Yeah.
Okay, hello.
Yeah.
Leandra Bernstein, RIA Novosti. This is a question about the geopolitical concerns that you raised. I have to disagree that you can separate the economics and geopolitics, obviously with regard to Russia. The sanctions, some analysts have say, are pushing Russia closer to China. I'd like to know how you see that playing out, particularly with Russia, and then also the potential conflict you mentioned with China and the West.
Okay. I'll take one question in the back over there.
Hi, Kent Hughes here at the Wilson Center. I'm just curious what you think the role of the BRICS might be inside the G20, which has become something of a global management institution.
Thank you. And I'll take, okay, okay. One really quick question here. If you can keep it short, sir.
Yes, I'm Dennis Halpin from the U.S. Korea Institute. On the geopolitical area that was raised, there's there's a contention that Beijing has its own agenda in setting up the BRICS. Part of this would be in the long term to replace the U.S. dollar as the world currency. So I'd like you to comment on that.
Okay, just quick one back there. Gentleman in the green shirt.
Hi, my name's Jeff. I'm with DevX. I wanted to ask just real quick what your thoughts on how the new development bank is going to impact the current development landscape, what sort of organizations might benefit from their funding, and what countries might specifically benefit from the new development bank.
Okay. I think if you can keep it short, like 20 seconds. Okay. That's going to be the last one.
Okay.
Hi there. I'm Nikolai from the Embassy of Denmark. Very short question on the cohesion of the BRICS. What is the importance of the notion that some BRICS are democratic and some are not? How does this domestic institutional difference impact their foreign policy aim and foreign policy means? Thank you.
Okay. So I think a lot of questions, a bunch of them to do with talking about the geopolitics, separating the geopolitics from the economics part of the BRICS mission. The other has to do with the potential competition between China and the West with the currency issue tied in. Does China have a hidden agenda with regard to controlling the global currency markets eventually? The role of the BRICS within the G20 and who benefits from the new development bank, and then the cohesion of the BRICS. Politically.
Him first?
Sorry. Renato, you want to go first? A whole bunch of them. Pick 2.
Starting with the BRICS, I will leave the separation between economics and geopolitics to my colleagues. Let me focus on the other questions. BRICS and the G20. It is something amazing that within the G20, before you enter the meeting room, you don't negotiate, in the case of Brazil, as intensely with, say, Argentina and Mexico, then as intensely as you do with the other BRICS. So yes, there is an intention and a practice to have a more definite role in the G20. To the matter of fact, that's why the BRICS were initiated to begin with, try and influence the global governance. So it makes every sense to have a more joint action. China, yes, it has an agenda in trying to universalize the renminbi. A number of countries, Brazil in particular, among them, has formal agreement to accept national currencies in bilateral trade. But as it turns out, the Congress has never approved that. But the pressure by the Chinese is recurrent and rather strong. And to my surprise, just a couple of days before the Fortaleza summit, the Brazilian newspaper published a very long interview with the president of the Russian Development Bank. And he was extremely emphatic for the need to replace the dollar and mentioned the very fact that on the bilateral trade relations between Russia and China, a good deal of trade is done in renminbi. Of course, a number of neighboring countries in Southeast Asia already trade with China in renminbis, and a number of them have already used renminbi as their foreign currency reserves. So yes, there is a movement, and yes, there is an explicit intention by China. And it's not for other reason that you have the Shanghai experiment of opening a region that, a pilot experiment of having a region that is open to capital movements. If that turns out to be a positive outcome, then they will make that an overall Chinese territory experience, etc. So yes, it's very clear there. Now, how the bank will impact specific countries, as I said, it's still to be defined. It's not quite clear, or at least it has not been divulged, as far as I know, how the bank is going to operate, what type of operation, what type of project, and which countries qualify to be financed by this bank. So right now, I think it's impossible to have precise answer with regard to that. With regard to democratic versus non-democratic, I can only mention our personal experience. IPEA is the official Brazilian think tank in the BRICS Council of Think Tanks Council. And it's up to us now to coordinate all the works and so on. And it comes quite clear, this double dimension of who can act, say, more freely, and who has to every time go out of the meeting room, goes back home and have some decision with regard to a specific word that will be in the formal statement, things like that. So I presume that at the summit level, as well as the level of Sherpa negotiations, that should be even more clear. Yes, there is a difference, and yes, that we have that on a daily basis.
And I think I'm going to, thank you, Renato. I'm going to ask our two other speakers to just take one question, closing thoughts, 1 minute each.
Go ahead.
1 minute, okay. Yeah. Let me just say that I think that in terms of the geopolitics, and you can't separate economics from politics, but the core business of BRICS is global economic governance reform. Now, what I consider to be a high risk factor for BRICS in terms of its focus is the geopolitical agendas of the two BRICS members, Russia and China. Now their agendas, as they are propelled by nationalistic compulsions, could tend to place BRICS in more of a neo-Cold War profile, which really will not do BRICS very good service, because it will polarize. It will polarize the environment, and which is one of the reasons why I strongly feel that that South Africa, India, and Brazil really have to focus on maintaining the vitality of IPSA, and not as an alternative to BRICS, but as a means of offsetting their strategic autonomy within the context of BRICS, so that they are not blocked into a new block that some people that some would like to put it in, with respect to BRICS. So I think that the three, what it really means is that each country is going to have to navigate a multi-vectored foreign policy in which they don't put all of their bricks in the BRICS basket, so to speak. I'll stop there.
Well, just quickly, I believe that on the question of the democracy, the IPSA, I think each country reflects their own realities. In Brazil, I can assure you, there are 200 million people there. Brazil is a democracy. It is a consolidated democracy. It's not going to be anything other than a pluralistic, messy democracy. That's precisely the one we built. That's precisely the one we like. And the BRICS is going to have to fit into that thing. The question on currency, I believe that it's very interesting to hear from Renato that the Russian minister said, yes, we want to replace the dollar. Obviously, Russia and the United States are not exactly in friendly terms right now. I believe that that had something to do with that. Notice that the Chinese never say such thing. It's always harmonious rise. They act. And they are doing through the Shanghai process what they need. Actually, there is an idea in the BRICS to trade also in their own currencies, and this will remain to be seen. China is the second largest economy in the world. Maybe in the next 5 to 10 years, will become the first one. And obviously, that process will influence the international setting on who holds the currency of reserve. Obviously, it doesn't depend only on what happens in China or in the BRICS. It always depends on what happens in the United States. Regarding the international organizations, there is an effort ongoing with the support of Europe, I think with the support of the Obama administration, to continue to move on with the reforms. If you pay attention, though, to the U.S. Congress, you know that the chances of that reform process going forward is below zero, I would say so. And this is also a choice of the United Nations, the United States of America, on it's relevant to keeping the reserve currency because, well, you have to lead, you have to act. And what I think in that narrow sense, the BRICS are using, the space available. But in the case of Brazil, the discussion, it's not when you think about BRICS in Brazil and say, oh, Brazilians think the BRICS is such a thing. No, Brazilians think a gazillion things about the BRICS, as we think a gazillion things about everything else, as a vibrant democracy does.
Okay, I think a really good session, and I think some of the three of the core messages that I'm taking from this is that if you are looking for an organization or someone to change the international political order, the BRICS are not it. That their mission is much, much more narrower than that. And therefore that discussion about should there be change in the international political order and who's best to lead that change is something that should not be directed to the BRICS because they have a narrower focus. One of the first fathers of African independence, Kwame Nkrumah, said, "Seek ye first the political kingdom and the economic kingdom shall follow thereafter." Sounds to me that the BRICS have recognized that although countries speak about political integration, they continue to guard their sovereignty jealously, and that it's easier to get cooperation, and that one of the easiest way to get that cooperation is around economic issues. and therefore they're focusing on that economic part of the discussion. The issue of norm setting on the governance front, I think it was our colleague here from one of the embassies who raised that, is not part of what the BRICS are doing. So I think a whole lot there. The third final message I got is that this is a work in progress. It is evolving, it is changing, there's potential for it taking on some of the larger mission that we've talked about, but right now it's a very, very narrow mission. With that, I would like to say, first of all, Steve McDonald, we missed you today. I hope you're listening to the webcast. I think Francis did you a lot of justice. But with that, I'd like you to please join me in thanking our three speakers, especially Dr. Renato for the session tonight. So thank you so much, and we hope to see you again at the Wilson Center.
Thank you. Renato, obrigado. I'll call you in a moment.
Ok. Obrigado, um abraço.
Yeah, there is